Welcome everyone! So, how exactly does a simple 6th century Indian board game evolve into the absolute most mathematically complex, culturally integrated mind sport in Japanese history? Well, that's exactly what we're going to figure out today. We are looking at a game that survived feudal warfare, the strict caste systems of the Edo period, and even the digital revolution, all by brilliantly adapting its rules and its spirit.
Here's a quick roadmap for our explainer today. We'll be covering the journey to Japan, the Age of Giants, the drop rule revolution, the Shogun's game, and finally, the shift from heritage to meritocracy. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Journey to Japan and its roots on the Silk Road.
You know, long before shogi became this uniquely Japanese cultural artifact, it was actually part of a massive global family tree, one that sprouted all the way back in the Indian subcontinent. The lineage really begins with chaturanga in 6th century India, which represented the 4 divisions of a classic military. We're talking elephants, chariots, cavalry, and infantry. As this concept traveled along the Silk Road, it morphed into zhangqi in China, and eventually it reached Japan by the late 6th or 7th century. As you can see, they all share that exact same DNA, the core objective of trapping a king on a grid. But modern shogi evolved to use a 9x9 board, 20 pieces per player, and most crucially, a capture-by-drop move style. That unique mechanic is literally what sets it completely apart from its cousins. But hey, we'll get to that revolutionary twist in just a minute.
So, when the game reached the Heian nobility in Japan around the 11th century, it underwent this profound cultural transformation. Out went the elephants and chariots, and in came the 5 treasures of Buddhism. The king became the jade general. You had gold generals, silver generals, the laurel horse, and the fragrant chariot, which represented incense. For the Japanese aristocracy, this wasn't just a basic game of war anymore. It was a highly refined, intellectual, and spiritual exercise.
All right, moving on to Section 2. The Age of Giants, Medieval Scaling. As Japan transitioned from the courtly elegance of the Heian period to the grand-scale, intense military administrations of the medieval era, well, the game shifted right alongside it. You can almost think of shogi during this time as a biological organism, awkwardly adapting to the massive, chaotic scale of feudal warfare. I mean, the Japanese basically couldn't stop making the board bigger. We start with Heian small shogi on an 8x8 or 9x8 board. Then, by 1120, they introduced Heian dai shogi, bumping it way up to a 13x13 board with pieces like the fierce tiger and flying dragon. But, you know, that was a bit too slow and cumbersome, so by the 14th century, they found a sweet spot with chu shogi, or middle shogi, on a 12x12 board. This version introduced the absolutely terrifying lion piece, which could literally move twice in a single turn, capture 2 pieces, and retreat. Chu shogi was such a huge hit that it was played for centuries.
But no, they didn't stop there. The Japanese fascination with scaling this game reached absolute, almost impractical extremes, basically just for prestige. Just take a look at these stats for Taikyoku Shogi. We're talking a 36x36 board, 402 pieces for each player, and 209 distinct types of pieces that you had to memorize. Imagine sitting down for an average game that lasts 2,000 moves. You'd literally need to pack a few weeks' worth of lunch for that. Now, these giant variants were likely just intellectual curiosities or, display items for the elite. But they clearly show this relentless search for strategic depth.
Which brings us to Section 3. The drop rule revolution, a mathematical leap.
Now, the secret to infinite strategic depth wasn't making the board the size of a dining room table. Actually, it was a single brilliant rule change. Enter mochigoma, or the drop rule. Sometime around the 15th and 16th centuries, players on the smaller 9x9 board adopted a rule where a captured piece doesn't actually leave the game. Instead, it goes into your hand, and on any given turn, you can drop it back onto the board as part of your own army. This is so cool because it perfectly mirrored the real-life mercenary shifting of the Sengoku or Warring States period. Captured samurai back then often switched loyalties to fight for their captors rather than face execution. And because shogi pieces are wedge-shaped and pointed at the opponent rather than being colored black and white, switching a piece's loyalty is literally as simple as just turning it around.
And this brilliantly illustrates the mathematical explosion that followed. Over on the left, we have the game tree complexity of Western chess, sitting at 10 to the power of 123, which is massive, right? But on the right, entirely because of the drop rule, modern shogi sits at an unbelievable 10 to the power of 226. To put that into perspective, in Western chess, as pieces are captured, the board simplifies, and the game naturally funnels down toward an endgame. But in shogi, material advantage is never permanent, and the board never really empties. A captured piece is this latent threat that can just materialize anywhere, at any time.
It took a shrinking game of attrition and turned it into a highly dynamic, aggressive contest with practically infinite possibilities.
Okay, Section 4. The Shogun's Game. State-sponsored art.
So, with this incredibly complex game now fully standardized, the Tokugawa shogunate stepped in. They took this wild, dynamic game and essentially locked it into a very rigid, state-sponsored system. In 1612, they established the Iamoto system. The governance of the entire shogi world was handed over to just 3 elite families: the Yohashi main family, the Yohashi branch, and the Ito family. The highly coveted title of Meijin, or master, became strictly hereditary, passing down only through the most talented members of these specific families. At this point, shogi was no longer just a game. It was a highly protected cultural art form, right on par with the tea ceremony and no drama. They even had annual matches played directly in front of the shogun himself inside Edo Castle.
And let me tell you, the social pressure within this closed system was absolutely crushing. There's this famous urban legend from around 1650 known as the Vomiting Blood Game. Basically, an established master, Ito Sokan, faced off against a challenger named Higaki Zien. The match was reportedly so intense and the stakes of prestige so overwhelmingly high that Zien is said to have vomited blood and literally died from pure mental exhaustion after losing. Now, whether that's fully true or just heavily dramatized by street storytellers, it perfectly highlights how these matches were viewed by the public. They were seen as literal life-and-death battles of intellect.
But while the Masters were this elite and hereditary group, the game itself bled into absolutely every corner of society. Edo Japan had a very strict 4-class system, but shogi transcended it completely. It became a beloved staple of the floating world pop culture. For instance, everyday people could buy affordable woodblock prints by famous artists like Shiraku, depicting sumo wrestlers and kabuki actors casually playing shogi. The legendary playwright Chikamatsu Manzayamon, who is often called Japan's Shakespeare, frequently used the intense discipline of shogi as a metaphor to contrast with the impulsive, tragic emotions of his characters. It was quite literally everywhere.
And that brings us to our final section, number 5. From heritage to meritocracy, the modern era. Now, all eras must come to an end. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 dismantled the feudal system, which meant shogi had to tear down its own ancient traditions just to survive. During this chaotic transition period, the game actually became a battleground for cultural identity, famously split right down the middle between the North and the South. Up in Tokyo, you had Kinjiro Sekine, representing the formal, scholarly, elite traditions of the old masters. Down in Osaka, you had Sakata Sankichi. Sankichi was a brilliant, highly unconventional player who grew up in the alleyways and learned simply by watching adults play. He represented the defiant, creative brilliance of the common man. This fierce rivalry absolutely gripped the nation, and it proved to everyone that true skill wasn't just inherited, it was forged.
The historical weight of this next moment really cannot be overstated. In 1935, that same Kinjiro Sekine, who was now the 13th generation Meijin, recognized a hard truth. A hereditary system was fundamentally incompatible with the modern world. So he did something unprecedented. He voluntarily stepped down and entirely abolished the 300-year-old generational master system. He replaced it with the Real Strength Tournament. From that moment on, the title of master wouldn't just be handed to you because of your last name. You had to fight for it in a grueling tournament. Shogi had finally and successfully embraced pure meritocracy.
So the game managed to survive medieval war, strict feudal politics, and massive modernization. But that brings us to the ultimate question for our explainer today. Can a game that was standardized all the way back in the 16th century survive the ultimate evolutionary pressure of the 21st century? Well, the answer is a resounding yes, though definitely not without a fight. Because of that mess of 10 to the 226 power complexity created by the drop rule, shogi actually held out against artificial intelligence much longer than Western chess did. But by the 2010s, supercomputers like Pananza and Elmo finally conquered it, consistently defeating top human professionals. But here's the really incredible part about all this. AI didn't destroy the game. Instead, the Japan Shogi Association and its pros have fully integrated AI as an ultimate training partner. They actively use it to verify wild new tactics, sparking this rapid era of theoretical evolution that's pushing human boundaries even further than ever before.
And I think that leads us perfectly to this summary quote right here. Whether played in the quiet halls of a Kyoto temple or on a smartphone in a Tokyo subway, shogi continues to captivate the Japanese mind with its blend of tactical brutality and elegant strategy. It is truly a living artifact. It's a beautiful bridge that spans 1,500 years of history, dropping it right into the palm of your hand in the digital age.
It really makes you think about how resilience actually works, doesn't it? Shogi survived not by staying exactly the same, but by constantly adapting its mechanics, its social structure, and its tools to fit whatever era it found itself in, all while keeping its core identity completely intact. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. What other ancient systems around us are quietly adapting in plain sight just to survive our modern digital world? Keep your eyes open and keep learning. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.